Welcome to the 12th episode of Vital Questions. I get hyped every time I say the number, yo, because we doing it, because we out here every week. We out here every week giving people the stories. As always, I'm your host.
Yeah, you're a co-host.
I'm co-host. You know what? Today I am actually going to be co-host because I'm Che Guerrero.
I was like, am I going to be Che?
You're going to be Che. No, la co-host, as always.
La co-host.
La co-host actually put together a very important news story for today that we're not even gonna mess around in the beginning. I know you love us, rambling a little bit and getting into it slowly, but this week we're gonna get right into our main topic. But first, I know I already said we were going to, but first, real quick, I do want to thank people for checking out our Substack. Actually, and then after that, we'll get into the news story. Last week, our podcast, I want to thank you all, grew tremendously from hold on, I gotta put it up. Sorry. Our podcast grew tremendously from people checking it out through Substack. It was the most listens we have gotten to since we first started.
Yeah.
A lot of people engaged with us on Substack, so we want to just thank you all for making our launch of our Substack a success.
Yeah, and thank you guys so much also for comments. Like, I know it might be silly, but especially for us starting out in Substack as a new platform, there's obviously we were fortunate to have a following elsewhere, but as a new platform, it's great to have community being built out so quickly.
Yeah.
And we're very thankful for everyone that's supportive and leaving comments and engaging.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's really what it is. It's about sharing information, real, accurate information that's been vetted and building kind of together.
Yeah, and it was, like I said, it was amazing how many people listen to a podcast, which is, more people getting information out there. So yeah, just as always, remember we are on Substack now at Che Guerrero ENG, and you can actually find us on all platforms: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Substack now at Che Guerrero ENG. So yeah, that's pretty much all the housekeeping I wanted to do, because we wanted to get, and you already read the title of this episode, that it's going to deal heavily with the masks that ICE continues to wear as they round up people around the country. And we're trying to figure out, and we were looking deep into this because, what is the norm of this? Like, how has it been in the past? How has it been as far as what are the criteria for when they show up? Okay, so here we have, La Co-host has pulled up for us some information on exactly what are some of the criteria for when ICE and officials approach you, identifying themselves, all that stuff. So like co-host, let us know what you found out, overview going through this.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea of today's episode is to kind of run through all the different requirements that technically ICE and DHS is supposed to follow when arresting a person, right? So here we have really some of the main language that governs that situation. So I won't make this a law school class and read verbatim what's in here. I'll just quickly summarize, but we did want to share it with everyone. So if you want to look at it yourself, and if you're a lawyer or if you know how to interpret it, obviously feel free to interpret it for yourself. So this is section 287.8C2, the general procedures for conducting an arrest or detainment of someone. So technically, an immigration officer can only arrest someone if they have, quote, reason to believe that the person has broken the law or is in the U.S. without authorization. So that's the first requirement, right?
Right.
So the language of, quote, has reason to believe gives it a lot of space for the immigration officer to have their own opinion come into play, right? This allows for racial profiling. What does reason to believe mean? And it's intentionally vague, right, to give a lot of deference to the immigration officer. So sure, in a perfect world, it would mean that they witness something that would cause them to think this person has, either committed a crime or is in the U.S. without authorization.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, I didn't want to cut you off. No, but that is exactly that's that's where we begin the issue with racial profiling.
Right.
Is if the officer believes, and it also goes back to the propaganda thing.
Yeah.
Where a lot of TV shows deal with police officers being able to sense. Like, I think the new show Poker Face is like, I can tell when someone's lying to me. There's literally a show called Lie to Me where like a dude could just look in your eyes and know when you were lying. Like, that's the kind of mysticism that is put on TV.
Right.
So the general public believes that just because you went through a 6-month training through a police academy, you're somehow a Jedi to tell who is or who is not lying.
Well, and that's the other thing, right? That in a perfect world, again, there should be proper training. And sure, that proper training should then give the officer the skill set to be able to identify what is quote unquote suspicious behavior
Mhm.
that would give them reason to believe that this person has either committed a crime or is in the country without authorization. The problem is that one, we actually don't know if all these officers have been vetted to that extent or been
Mhm.
trained to that extent.
Mhm.
I feel like it's, again, this is a guess and this is assumption, but I feel like it's a safe assumption to assume that at this point, because of the way different officers have been deputized
Mhm.
and different other departments have been brought into immigration, operations, I have a feeling everyone hasn't been properly trained, right?
Mhm.
Just off the rip, like
Mhm.
putting aside racial profiling, which is for sure happening, putting aside all these other things, I have a feeling it's safe to say that people haven't been properly trained in the way that they're supposed to,
No.
simply just to be able to identify what is suspicious. Again, this is just point one.
This is point one, people.
Okay. So we're going to bring back the section to go on to point two. So they actually are supposed to generally have an arrest warrant. I will say there is an exception for, unfortunately,
This is what we're gonna go through real quick. Is that there always gonna be an exception?
yeah, and that's the thing. I know people always make fun of lawyers because they always say, "Oh, lawyers don't give a clear answer." It's because of the way oftentimes the law is written. The
Mhm.
laws tend to have a lot of different exceptions and different circumstances that will then trigger another exception, right? So, and this is what makes the law so difficult to understand because they generally try to capture all these different situations, right? So that way there's no question of what to do. So yeah, so they're supposed to have an arrest warrant, but there is an exception, and we'll get to it later on, for migrants that are in the US without authorization.
Mhm.
The other exception is if the officer believes that the person is likely to escape before they can get a warrant, right? So that's, you know, obviously the whole warrant
Mhm.
issue has been a big deal because
Yeah.
a lot of people, even people that are not involved in the situation, have been recording and actually stepping in a great way
Mhm.
and questioning officers. Hey, do you have an arrest warrant?
Mhm.
And they usually don't say anything, don't acknowledge it, and usually that means they don't.
Yeah.
Now, yes, there is an exception where an officer can detain someone that's in the country without authorization, right? There's also the exception of if they're afraid that the person will run away or
Yeah.
is a flight risk.
Mhm.
But as we've seen, and I feel like if we look at later on, we'll look at certain cases of detainments. And I feel like if we look back, once we look back to that, we'll see how they're actually not abiding by the things they're supposed to be abiding by.
Right.
But we just wanted to keep in mind that these are actually the requirements they're supposed to be.
Yeah. And warrant also is again just there are different type of warrants.
Right.
One of the situations that were happening in Wisconsin with the judge who allegedly helped that migrant get away in her courtroom. You know, one in that news story, there was a debate on what kind of warrant was issued. Was it just a warrant by ICE
Right.
or was it a warrant by a judge? And apparently now they're saying, these ICE warrants are just written by ICE
Right.
and they're not signed by a judge. So just a piece of paper that ICE could be like, this is a warrant. Literally, they could just put this is a warrant
Right.
now. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they
And
can come up with that.
And the reason why it's so important to have a judicial warrant is because a judge, ideally an impartial party, has reviewed the facts that have been presented to them by ICE because that's what's supposed to happen
Hmm.
in order to get a warrant.
Yeah.
I.e., that means that there's been due process. That's why everyone keeps hearing this buzz phrase of due process. I hope most people
You said the word of the week is due process.
there you go.
Thank you.
But and I hope everyone knows what it means, and please look it up if you don't. But getting a judicial warrant is an element of due process, right? So
Hmm.
that's why everyone keeps harping on, hey, did you have a judicial warrant for this arrest or detainment? So we'll move on just because we have a lot to cover.
Yeah.
So going back to the language from
Hmm.
the regulations. So at the time of the arrest, the immigration officer is also supposedly, as soon as it's practical and safe to do so, which we'll get back to, they're supposed to identify him or herself as an immigration officer who is authorized to execute an arrest and state the reason why the person is under arrest.
Hmm. Hmm.
And again, pretty straightforward. I think that this is now hitting on what people have been talking about, right? That and kind of one of the elements of, or the main element of our episode today about identifying yourself.
Yeah.
So they are, irrespective of what's happening, whether or not you have a warrant, and again, we'll get into the situations
Mhm.
about not having an arrest warrant, you're supposed to identify yourself.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about that, but just at bare minimum, I think it should generally be understood that this is to avoid kidnapping, abductions, other crimes being committed by
Mhm.
people impersonating ICE
Mhm.
because they think they have the cloak of invisibility on by having fake ICE gear.
Yeah.
And in this world, that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part. But again, we'll get into it.
Yeah. No, and I completely understand what you're saying, yeah, it's okay. So they're going about this in so many ways that we can check up already if they are following procedures on how to approach people. And you were saying that there are ways that they have to approach people who don't have authorization, because these are people that do have warrants for, and that they do, have authority for, or they
Right.
believe.
Right. But
Right.
again, in this, irrespective of whether or not they've committed a crime, they're here without authorization, irrespective of the situation that we're talking about, at bare minimum, the officers are supposed to identify themselves
Hmm.
and are supposed to state who is being arrested
Hmm.
and why they're being arrested.
Hmm.
Right. Now there's the exception of if it's an active operation,
Right. If they're
right?
undercover.
If they're undercover,
Right. We
if
understand
there's
that.
some kind of other mitigating circumstances that makes it either
Mm.
dangerous or something or a reason why they actually shouldn't. But again, we'll see later on when we pull up video and footage and,
Yeah.
images of people being arrested, how these people aren't posing a threat and they're
Mm.
not necessarily a flight risk.
Hmm.
And the
Most people
exceptions,
already coming up with their hands up, like, who is coming at me?
right, exactly. So there's actually no reason to be as aggressive as we've seen and not following the protocol that's been laid out by the law.
Hmm.
Now it does beg the question, and it's a question, I'll just leave it as a rhetorical one of is this another example of the lack of training by their part, right? Because they're not following protocol. And maybe that's also because they don't know what protocol is, because maybe you were just a meter maid and a random town in the middle of nowhere and you were brought in, hey, now everyone in this random town is going to be a nice agent because
Yeah.
that's what this
Yeah.
administration wants.
Yeah. Because that's, they're also teaming up with DEA, FBI, Coast Guard, local law enforcement. The chaos that is the Trump administration, I'm telling you right now, the coordination between all these departments is not running smoothly.
No, it couldn't
It
possibly.
couldn't possibly. That was one of the biggest things that out of 9/11 that came out of, is that they realized that a lot of departments weren't talking to each other.
Mhm.
That the chaos between the FBI and the CIA and all this stuff was like, we're more important than you, we supersede you or whatever. So that was chaos to try and get everybody on the same page. And I'm sure the Trump administration is not working properly to try and bring everybody on the same page.
I mean,
It's
yeah, we
and,
were
and chaos is part of his plan, actually.
right.
It's the oops, we didn't know what protocols were actually, so we didn't technically violate you. We just didn't follow the full new protocol, yada, yada, yada.
Right, exactly, and it's always the excuse of I mean, we've seen it with the heads of departments, right? We've seen, um, Kristi Noem not know what a lot of legal concepts are, right? We see a lot of heads of other departments not
Hmm.
know what their duty is,
Yeah.
what their job description is, what is it that they're supposed to be doing, right? Like, so yeah, so I feel like it's a safe guess to assume that that's probably trickling down.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, I mean, we wanted to get to why the face mask.
Yeah, and we will, but
And this all, like, precedes, like, what it is, why we believe that they're,
yeah,
wearing the
exactly.
masks.
Yeah. So just moving on
Hmm.
through the language,
Yeah.
going back to again what they're supposed to be doing. Now, section 4 of this subsection talks about what we were talking about earlier, right? What happens when in a migrant is arrested without a warrant for being in the country without authorization, right? So this is a situation where someone is administratively charged, not criminally, right? So again, a reminder,
Big difference.
yeah, that being in the country without authorization is not a crime. That's why in the law itself, it flags that by showing administratively charged, not criminally charged. Because yes, if you entered in a point through a port of entry without the proper procedure,
Hmm.
then yes, you entered without authorization. That could potentially be considered a crime depending on the circumstances in your entrance.
Again, depending.
Right. And again, depending, but just being undocumented in and of itself is not a crime.
It's
So
crazy. Like, the law is like a Rube Goldberg, where it's just like you kick something and then it trigger, and then this and then this and this, but it could probably, it's like, what am I triggering here?
exactly. And that's what part of the reason that makes the law so difficult because there are a lot of cross references as we see in this section, right? So we're going to hold this section for after we go through the rest of this to not confuse the process, right?
Sorry,
So
keep
we're
going.
holding off on the situation where migrants are administratively charged with being in the country without authorization or for violating their visa, right? And they're arrested in that situation without a warrant. So we're going to hold off on that and move on to the next section. So the next section, section 5, over here, talks about for a person that's arrested and charged with committing a crime, right? So clarifying here, this is for a person charged and arrested with committing a crime. Here, it talks about how they're actually entitled to Miranda rights, right? So if they are in the situation where they're claiming, hey, we're looking for so and so, you match this description, blah blah, and in this situation, they're, regardless of whether you're a migrant, it's a person. This is the language here, a person. If a person is arrested and charged with committing a crime, they are required to be read their Miranda rights. Now, I feel like we've seen time and time and again that when have we seen footage of a migrant being arrested and being read their Miranda rights at the point of arrest?
Right. Oh, that's so crazy. So this is something probably I didn't know, and you just helped me realize something. So when somebody is being arrested, of course, you've seen that Law and Order SVU being smashed up against the car. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you can will be used against you in a court of law.
Yeah, just to clarify. Sorry, I also realized that I just said Miranda rights as if everyone knows what Miranda rights are. So Miranda rights came from an actual case.
An actual case. Yeah, dude named Miranda.
Correct.
A dude named Wright.
And as a result of that, that's where you have the right. That's not where those rights came from, but that's where you got the right to be told, to be informed. Hey, at the point of the arrest, you are now being detained. As of now, this is your right. Your right to remain silent. Your right to representation.
Your right to an attorney.
Your right, representation, attorney. Yeah.
Sorry, they're the lawyer. I'm the layman. LLL.
But yeah, so all these things that we've seen in the movies, we see, that came, and that is a legal requirement. And again, it's reiterated here in this section about migrants, and it talks for a person, right? It's not about a migrant. It's irrespective of your status. This is still a right that you're given.
Right.
Notice that, again, the language in the law itself refers to people as aliens, which we don't like to use that language, and we encourage others not to.
Please.
Because you're not an alien in stolen land. But it's still important, the language that they're using.
Yeah.
And it is something that I do want to flag for people if you go on and read your own laws, right? There's a reason why the words that they're using are being used, right? There's a reason why there's space sometimes for an officer's subjective perception of a situation, right? If they have reason to believe, there's a reason why they included that language. And I do want people to be conscious of that.
Can I just say something real quick? So it didn't register to me that like, so when somebody gets arrested for a crime, they read the Miranda rights, but when somebody is detained for immigration violation or whatever, there is no reading of your rights, right? Because there is,
but they're supposed to. We saw it earlier, right? There's officers supposed to identify themselves. Officer is supposed to tell the person who are they looking for. The officer is supposed to tell them what's the crime, or what is it that they're being charged of, or whatever it is.
Even through ICE situation.
Right, exactly. Even through ICE situation, there's not necessarily only the crime, but also like, why are you being detained? Right. So there's, at bare minimum, there are those rights.
Yeah. See, because that's the thing. People don't think that, immigrants are supposed to get these. No, regardless of who you are. Thank you so much, co-host, for really getting to my head. Even these things have to be presented to you. And this is what due process is.
Yeah. And just finishing up this section 5, if we look at the language, it also goes into, so we talked about Miranda rights, again, irrespective of who's being arrested and being charged with a crime. And again, the way this administration is framing it is as if every single person being detained is being charged with a crime. And if that's your argument, then I'm expecting to see Miranda rights for every single person being detained, because that's what you're claiming, right? And also, what is the charge? All of these things that they're claiming they're doing, going after only criminals. Okay, so what's the charge to the child that you detained? Did you read them their Miranda rights? Like, this is how ridiculous we're talking, but this is what's actually happening. The last language here, where I do think it's important to flag for everyone, is, I'll highlight it here for everyone that's watching. The language says, and I'll read it off, it is the duty of the immigration officer to assure that the warnings are given in a language the subject understands, and that the subject acknowledges that the warnings are understood. The fact that a person has been advised of his or her rights shall be documented on appropriate department forms and made a part of the arrest record. Meaning,
dímelo.
If someone only speaks Spanish, technically, under the law, this officer is supposed to be explaining their rights in Spanish. And the person in Spanish is supposed to be able to acknowledge in Spanish that they
Mhm.
understand these rights.
Mhm.
And on top of that, the reading of these rights is supposed to be documented as well. Technically speaking, then, every single time people are being arrested or detained through a FOIA request, right? A Freedom of Information Act request, where we're able to request from the government information that should be available to the public, i.e., the things that they're doing.
Mhm.
In the arrest record for every single person, there should be a document that says the officer read all these rights,
Mhm.
the person understood in their native language or
Mhm.
in the language that they understand. That should be there every single time.
Mhm.
I'm gonna take a wild guess that it's not.
No. No. And it's crazy because like in a lot of people's minds, let's say, you do have like I said, what somebody that's called obviously guilty, like, that we've said this term before, obviously guilty. Like even that person does have to have all these things, given to them because like we've said, once you start denying these things and you start cutting corners, it's a real slippery slope. I know it's frustrating when you see somebody who's obviously guilty be in the court system for like 5 years before finally, something is done or a verdict is given. But as frustrating as it is now, I look at it in the sense like, look, we're going through a system. I know the system's not perfect. People
Right.
get more, um, privileges the more money they have, and a lot of the arrest and convictions that we have in this country are through plea deals because the government gives, the book to someone and try to throw the book at them. They're like, whoa, 20 years for stealing a book bag. All right, I'll take 18 months, something
Mhm.
like that. So you get a lot of those the people who didn't do anything, but they just rather serve the less time than the more. But still, it's still a system that we had in place to try,
Mhm.
but now even the lack of a system that we had has just been thrown out the window.
And also, yeah, and that's the problem that people don't know their rights, right? Like, I'm hoping that this is informative, like this episode is informative for people. But if it is, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that, let's assume that a lot of other people didn't know that either.
Yeah,
And that's part of the problem.
yeah. And just, like you were saying, one of the things is that they can detain you if you have no authorization, no visa. And talk
Hmm.
about people not knowing their rights. One of the biggest stories this last week, which we might have covered, we've done so many news reports, is the fact that a lot of people in immigration courts are getting their cases dismissed.
Hmm.
But because they're not going with attorneys, they don't realize that dismissed does not mean like, oh, the government just dismissed the notice of deportation that I had. They also dismissed my case.
Right.
So because I didn't know that, when I'm thinking I'm walking out of the courtroom going, oh, what a great day. My case has been dismissed. The government doesn't want to deport me anymore. I step outside. Now I'm under this new
Right.
umbrella of expedited removal.
And that actually comes up where I'm going to get to it in terms of expedited removal of like where that comes up in the regulations,
Right.
because that's an important aspect of it.
Mhm.
Because through expedited removal, that process actually inhibits your ability to have your day in court.
Yeah.
Technically, if you're put in expedited removal processes, you don't have to the administration doesn't have to put you in front of a judge
Mhm.
to send you out.
Mhm.
It seems like they can just file some paperwork and just kind of
Just
literally what it sounds like. You
push you
can
out.
just be pushed out
Mhm.
expeditedly. And the cases that you're talking about, right? We've discussed this, and I think actually you found it that when the courts are doing this, right, just dismissing cases and agents pick people up, they are, I think, potentially eligible to be put into expedited
Mhm.
removal, right? In
Mhm.
that those
Mhm.
circumstances. So this seems like a very intentional tactic by the administration. But
Yeah.
before we
Yeah. Sorry. It's just it's a lot. It's a lot. We haven't even got to the masks.
No, we haven't got to the masks. But again, as I was researching this, I just thought it was important for everyone to know the breadth and what these agents are
Mhm.
supposed to be doing,
Mhm.
and to keep that in mind whenever they see things. So going back to the language of the law,
Mhm.
as we know, it's so interesting. Um, so we're at section 6.
Mhm.
So here it says that every person, again, person, arrested and charged with a criminal violation of the United States has to be brought into court, quote, without unnecessary delay. So that's the other thing. We've heard reports about a lot of people in detention centers for weeks, months on end. But again, the language is vague, right? Quote unquote, unnecessary delay. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And that's very subjective,
Mhm.
right? So under the law, yes, there's certain standards in terms of reasonableness
Mhm.
and what is quote unquote unnecessary, but we're in unprecedented
Yeah.
times. So it's hard to find what would be a quote unquote unnecessary delay.
Somebody actually posted this as like almost like a joke, or trying to be like a jerk in one of the comments that we had in one of our videos, but somebody goes like, you know what? If you want these people to give due process, fine, I'll give them due process. 72 hours. The government has 72 hours to bring up a case. The migrant has 72 hours to like collect evidence. And then in 72 hours, we have a case, and that's it. You want, and I'm like, okay, let there be actual time limit, because the whole, reasonable time is very vague.
Right.
Let's put 86 hours on the clock. You know
Right,
what I mean?
exactly. And we'll get into it, but there are other metrics when we go into the section about a migrant being detained for being in the country without authorization or for violating the terms of their visa, right? That's the section we skipped over
Right.
just to keep things flowing and to not confuse people. So just to finish off this section, the last section, subsection 7, talks about and this is a quote, right? The use of threats, coercion, or physical abuse by the designated immigration officer to induce a suspect to waive his or her rights or to make a statement is prohibited. And I just wanted to flag that because we've seen time and time again. Again, I encourage everyone to do their own research because I can only do so much. But we've seen reports where people are being at borders and coming back from traveling internationally. Migrants apparently are being given forms and potentially signing away their rights, right? Being told, "Hey, sign here in order to get out of this room." And especially if things aren't being explained to them properly, if they don't recognize, "Hey, I'm actually being detained right now," because being detained is the question, am I free to go? If the answer is no, okay, then I am under custodial detainment. That means that now my Miranda rights are triggered. Now all these other rights are being triggered because I'm actually not free to go. And ideally, the government has a reason to detain you, because if you're not free to go and they don't have a reason, that could be kidnapping, that could be a bunch of other crimes. So let's hope that the government does have a reason. Again, I'm not saying they don't, right? But
they're not giving it to us.
right.
In a lot of cases, and that's where we keep saying, this is, I know people like, we're not just being hyperbole. A lot of this feels like kidnapping, disappearing, because when you're not following these protocols and you're not doing what you have to do,
that becomes a problem. So going back to the section that we skipped. So what we have here is, quote, disposition of cases of aliens arrested without a warrant, right? So now this is a whole other subsection, 287.3. Again, I won't read verbatim the words because I don't want to bore you all with a mini law school class, but just really high
level.
level.
You're here for a mini law school class,
Right,
maybe you are. Maybe you're actually be like, yo, I'm learning so much beyond just the ICE is doing this. I'm looking at the mechanics of it all.
Right.
Remember, this person went to college for years to get this information and we're getting it for free.
Right. And
check
again,
out our Substack so you can help us continue this work. Thank you.
But side note and disclaimer, for all my articles, again, this is not legal advice.
No.
This is for educational purposes only.
Of course.
Please consult a lawyer.
Of course.
Whenever you need legal advice. And that lawyer is not me. So
but
I am not your lawyer.
We do appreciate the knowledge that you do bring to these topics that are more than just a layman like me.
So looking at this section again, I'll just go through it. So subsection A, this is a situation where, again, reminder, this is a situation where a migrant is administratively charged with being in the country without authorization or for violating their visa and is arrested without a warrant, where, again, just to clarify, technically officials can do this. But if they do this, they have to follow these procedures. So this seems to be where a lot of people are falling also, right? From the cases that we've been seeing, it's been a lot of, quote, innocent people, right, that don't have criminal records, but there's some, for whatever reason, still being detained. So presumably they're here without authorization or they violated the terms of their visa. Because again, administration, that's the only other situation where you should be, arresting people or detaining people. So again, assuming that that's what the administration is doing, then this is also what they're supposed to be doing. So when a migrant is taken in, the arresting officer cannot be the person that is examining them, meaning questioning them about their status, about all that stuff. Technically, the arresting officer is supposed to, again, identify themselves, say who they're looking for, say what the person is being, whether criminally or administratively charged with, and bring them in. Then thereafter, they're supposed to be brought in front of another officer, an examining officer, the person who's going to be questioning them, right? Taking in their information and all that stuff. But again, if we look at the exception that there always is, the exception here talks about if another officer isn't available or if bringing the migrant to another officer would, quote, cause, again, unnecessary delay,
Mm-hmm.
which we don't know what that
I don't know what
means,
that means.
right? Which could
You
just
can't
be
wait 40 seconds?
right, right. And that's the thing. This kind of subjective language leaves space
Mm-hmm.
for this administration to play with,
Yeah.
and play with it they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
So
Tommy's on lunch break. You know what? I'm just gonna go through with it. He ain't around here right now. Nobody can help me out. Blah 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 blah.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, then the arresting officer, who may or may not have his biases, who may or may not have just been racially profiling, who knows?
Yeah.
Right. And again, who knows?
Oh, who might still, and sometimes, might still be heightened from that sort of, there is that cop like
Right.
adrenaline rush from having to like follow someone or investigate someone. So they're pumping on things. So I guess why, hey, let's hand this over to somebody who has a cooler head at the moment. And it's like, well, nobody's around. I got this. And
Exactly.
then how does their biases and their anger or whatever they went through go into this report?
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting.
So that becomes problematic in and of itself. And again, this is built into the regulations, I assume, just based on my understanding of the law, is to make it fair, right? For that situation. If the arresting officer just had a bias and racially profiled this person, ideally the examining officer is a different person that can vet the person that was brought in to make sure that they actually either committed the thing, did the wrong thing, whatever it is that they're being charged with. Right. So moving on to the subsection B of this section. And again, this is where someone is being arrested without a warrant for being in the country without authorization or violating their visa. So determination of proceedings. If the examining officer, again, the person questioning the migrant, thinks there's, quote, a prima facie case, or what this basically means in legal jargon is that there's sufficient evidence to have a case against this person, right? They have to determine that by asking the questions, right? Examining the migrant. And if they have to determine that whether the migrant entered the country without authorization, attempting to enter, was present. And then at that point, the examining officer will refer the case to an immigration judge, order the migrant to be removed, or take whatever, quote, take whatever other action may be appropriate or required under the law or regulations applicable to the particular case. And again, that catch-all language at the end, that's what we call catch-all language. That basically just says, whatever you could do under any regulations or any other law, or maybe even any executive order that allows you to do it, you can do that.
Yeah.
And that's the catch-all language. That, like, if you read this last sentence there, right, like, take whatever other action may be appropriate or required under the law or regulations applicable to the particular case. You think, okay, they can do whatever's legally allowed. Well, what if you have a president who's just spewing out executive orders left and right at a whim without being conscious of the actual law? And as we've seen, executive order after executive order has been deemed unconstitutional. So I think it's safe to say that that's the barometer that we're looking at this administration with.
Yeah.
That's what makes this problematic, right? It gives them the space for officials to play, to be like, well, the president said I could do this.
Right.
I was just following orders. And we know how that goes. So, right.
We know how that goes. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, no, and this is where you had to set up all these parameters to kind of tell people, like, these are the things that they're supposed to be doing,
right?
And these are the ways that they're supposed to be maneuvering. But again, look at that. You're also pointing out that also at the end of the day, executive orders or whatever they feel like following, hey, that's up to you guys as well,
right? And this is why I do caution everyone if you're doing your own research and you're reading your own thing, please don't skim when you're doing research. Language like this can just be like, oh, that just means whatever. It's the same thing as like when people think the language at the end of a contract means nothing. I always advise business clients that that's not actually the case, and I go through and explain that. Yeah. So language is language for a reason.
Exactly.
This other section C.
So is this the final section in this thing?
No.
Okay.
There's two more.
Okay.
So notifications and information. So here, and this is where it comes up, except in the case of expedited removals, right? A migrant arrested without a warrant, and placed into proceedings, at that point, they have to be informed, right, why they were arrested and the right to be represented at no expense to the government, right? So this is where it's not, they originally were administratively charged, right? Ideally with something, right? Because that's why you're detaining them. Or there was reasonable suspicion to think that they were in the country without authorization, right? So you were brought in.
Okay.
You should have been explained those points. And now an examining officer has questioned you, taken in your information, reviewed what you're claiming. And at that point, they need to make a decision, right? Are you going to be placed in front of a judge? Are you going to, have expedited proceedings, like all that stuff, right? And so again, the examining officer will provide the person also with a list of available free legal services and document that list that was provided to them. So that's something else that I feel like is safe to say that's probably not happening. I would love to see evidence otherwise, stating otherwise, that they actually are letting migrants know that, hey, there are free legal services that can help you in this situation and can help you against us. Like, I highly doubt that that's happening, but it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And again, they're supposed to be documenting that.
Right.
And then lastly, the officer will also advise the migrant that any statement made may be used against him or her in a subsequent proceeding, right? So like now this is touching on Miranda rights.
Okay, good. Because I was like, I wasn't sure if we got those, if immigrants and people,
Correct.
got those.
What is interesting though is that it doesn't mention the right to remain silent in this regulation. And I did note that where the other Miranda rights seem to be generally present, right? You have the right to representation and all that stuff.
And Latinos especially, because you know how much we love to talk.
Right.
No, que no sabe lo que pasó, que estaba aquí. It's like, hey, you have the right to remain silent. Like, oh, I do. Okay.
But I do think it's safe to say that people should just adhere to that. And again, don't say anything without a lawyer. Once you're detained, as soon as you're detained, those rights start getting triggered, right? So you should have representation. You should just not say anything until you know what's happening, right?
Exactly.
And then lastly, on the last section, I did want to note that it says, unless the government allows a migrant subject to deportation to, quote, voluntarily leave the country, a determination will be made within 48 hours of the arrest, whether the migrant will continue in custody or be released on bond, and whether a notice to appear and a warrant of arrest will be issued, right? So within 48 hours, in this situation, when someone's arrested or detained without a warrant and charged administratively initially, and then maybe found to be guilty of something or anything else, a decision has to be made within 48 hours. And of course, there's an exception. Except in the case of an emergency or other, quote, extraordinary of circumstance, in which a case a determination will be made within an additional reasonable period of time. And again, there we go with reasonable and vague language. And
always.
This is what's allowing the administration to kind of have this wiggle room.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, right?
And this is where we always say that this is a complicated system, especially designated for it to create winners and losers.
Correct.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what I mean. John Stewart did a perfect example of this, that like these are quote unquote norms, and Republicans find everything to go outside the norms.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, look at those language you read us. They're supposed to do this. They're supposed to do that. They're supposed to follow these rules. They're supposed to give people these rights. And then, but there's also exceptions to if you do this, that, executive orders, this, that. Like, Republicans know how to act like the system is still fair, but completely warping the reality of what's happening around it.
And that's
that's where we're getting into the next part.
Right. And that's the problem with what's happening, because all of this is set out. Yes, they intentionally leave catch-all, vague language to give space, for the same reason the Constitution gives space for changes to be made, because everyone understands and legislators understand that we can't predict the future, right? So you do need to leave space for wiggle room. But to use it for malicious reasons in the way this administration is using it, as like, oh, well, this is a loophole that we got. That's a problem, right? And again, not to be clear, not all the actions that they're doing is, oh, they're just finding loopholes. Like, no. Things are unconstitutional that they're doing. Things are illegal that they're doing. Like, make no mistake about that. But as we've seen, there are certain loopholes built into the law itself that is giving them wiggle room to do this. So just moving on, we are now going into, well, okay, so we're claiming that they're covering their faces and their identities and all that stuff. Like ICE is doing that during the point of detainment. But we, of course, need to show proof. So just in case you've been living under a rock and didn't see the images of a lot of what's been happening, I'm not sure if everyone's heard of Rumeysa Ozturk, but you should have at this point. So she is, or at this point, I'm not sure if she's still in school, but a Tufts University PhD student from Turkey who was detained by 6 plainclothes officers, most of whom were wearing face coverings. So we did pull the YouTube.
This was a student from Tufts University, who was accused of writing an op-ed in support of the Palestinian people. Just, talking about what's going on in Gaza.
Correct. And so this is her the point of detainment when she was. So at this point, we see that face coverings. There's just really one guy that's showing his face.
One guy.
I'll show you everything.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Mm. For
So
those at home, we're watching the video of them approaching her, all wearing face coverings, all of them just coming at her. I think she's waiting for a bus. She's just standing on a street corner.
mhm.
And that is a scary situation.
And this is America.
4 or 5
This is the US.
masked people coming at you, especially, a woman wearing a hijab, like covering herself and stuff like this is a very scary thing. A lot of them seem like white dudes in masks just coming
Mhm.
right up at you.
Right, exactly. And with not identifying themselves clearly, right? Like she took a step back and it's not like they said, "Hey, hold on, we are officials. No need to, we're looking we were looking for you because of XYZ. We need to take you in."
They didn't properly identify themselves.
Right. And clearly she's not a threat.
She's not running.
She's not running. She's just freaked out
Yeah.
because you approach her aggressively and aren't like identifying, aren't saying who you are,
Mhm.
aren't trying to be remotely comforting in the situation and are just coming aggressively. And then you question, oh, why are people so freaked out? Oh my God, they shouldn't run. Oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like we don't know who you are.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
don't know who you are.
Mhm.
Officially, we don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And that's first and foremost, that's the biggest
That's the
issue.
biggest thing. We don't know who you are.
Right.
You're covering your face. You're not identifying yourself. You're not saying you have a warrant. Like all the things that you're supposed to be doing, you're not doing.
Right, exactly. So we have more evidence to the
Mhm.
point of people not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So this is a video that we're gonna pull up. This is a man named Juan Francisco Mendez,
Mhm.
29-year-old, who had his car window broken into by ICE officials who were looking for someone, I believe, that wasn't even him.
Yeah, I think you might have seen this video. Like this is like the video that they post every single time, even in news stories that don't have anything to do with him. They tend to just use this image of ICE breaking in when they were looking for someone else and just not giving this guy, his rights and everything. So we're gonna pull that up right now.
Yeah.
There
So
we go.
this is from CBS Boston.
Yeah.
Just gonna play this.
Well, the video is intense. Federal agents smashing a car window while trying to detain the man who was inside. Now, the couple refused to get out of the car, and that's when those agents moved in. Now that man is being held out of state. As WBZ's Logan Hall found out, his attorneys say that he is not the man that the agents were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Shocking video showing the moment ICE agents smashed a car window and forcibly removed a man in New Bedford. 29-year-old Juan Francisco Mendez has no criminal record and was awaiting his final documentation to solidify his asylum status.
So the reason why I'm laughing is because, again, as we heard, he had an active case. He was here legally, right? The government knew about him. He was trying to get asylum. Clearly, he was leaving his home country for scary reasons, right? Again, people need to realize asylum is you physically can't be in the country. Your life is at risk
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
because of a political belief, because of your sexual orientation, because of a lot of different other categories. But this person can't be in their country, right? So it's not, oh, send them back. This is a joke. No, especially for asylum seekers, this is literally their life. Like this, and that's what's so heartbreaking that people don't understand. The lack of empathy is insane.
Well, there was a I think it was DHS or some posted something that asylum is not a get out of jail free card. So these people are painting asylum seekers as liars, as people who are using the system that is their system that is slow and it's difficult. You know what I mean? To weaponize it against people like, oh, they're just applying for asylum because they don't want to leave.
Right.
It's like, no, these people have the right to seek asylum. A lot of them do have cases, but the U.S. government makes it so difficult for you to actually, win those cases.
Right. And again, it's they're not criminals.
They're
Like,
not criminals.
I just can't. So last one here that we'll share, just to, again, I like to show enough evidence and proof of things, right? So we have a NPR article about two men being detained in a courthouse in alleged ICE raid, right? But on Tuesday morning, this is the article reading. On Tuesday morning, two men were detained by plainclothed U.S. Immigration and Customs officials at an Albemarle County Courthouse, causing confusion and spurring a Wednesday protest. So something else that we've seen is that officials have been in plain clothing, right? And and arriving in regular cars,
Yeah.
nothing that says police, nothing identifying
In a
themselves.
rented Kia.
Yeah, in a rented Kia, which is
Kia.
problematic because we need to, again, know what's going on.
Mhm.
And this isn't just because we want to be difficult. No, like
Yeah.
so it's gotten so bad to the point that we have a couple of Democratic senators who issued a press release about the issue. And I know that a lot of people are like, "Oh, Democrats aren't doing anything," which is
Mhm.
not true.
Mm.
But unfortunately, because of the structure of the administration and our current legislators in Congress, we are outnumbered right now.
Mhm.
So this is a press release from
Mhm.
Virginia Democratic senators Mark R. Warner and Tim Kaine.
Mhm.
Um,
Tim Kaine. Oh, sorry. Tim Kaine's always in the middle of something. Just trying to push some legislation, that guy. No, but I love it. Love
yeah,
it.
and they
It's
issued
a
a
heavy word.
they issued a press release on May 23rd of this year,
Mhm.
not pressuring, but reminding really DHS officers and ICE that they're required under the law and the regulations that we just went over to properly identify themselves and limit the use of face coverings.
Mhm.
Because that is something that's been causing their communities and in communities across the country, as they note, right?
Mhm.
That's not only in Virginia,
Mhm.
a lot of fear. And people were just afraid to go out because, again, this without identifying yourself, without showing documentation that this has gone through the due process that it's
Mhm.
supposed to,
Mhm.
without making it clear that you are not a random stranger, that you are actually an enforcement officer who's been trained and that this is legitimate
Mhm.
and that you're not arbitrarily picking people off the street. That's what that training is for. That's
Yeah.
what these procedures and what we went over the law is for,
Yeah.
which again seems like they're not doing.
And even senators are concerned about their use of face masks,
Right.
face coverings.
Right, exactly. So now we see that they are doing it, right?
Mhm.
We've shown evidence. We've
Mhm.
shown even press releases from senators about the problem.
Mhm.
So now the question is, why are they doing it, right? Like, and I think that's a valid question. I know that you and I have talked about it,
Mhm.
and I think you may have first told me that it's relating to doxing,
Yeah.
right? So do you want to
Yeah.
explain to everyone what doxing is?
Yeah, these people, these ICE agents, these federal agents are afraid that if people see their faces, or actually even going as far as some of them are covering their arms so they have no identifiable tattoos,
Mm-hmm.
because they're afraid that even through those things that activists will figure out who they are and leak their information to the public, and that the public will then come after them. And this is, and I don't think we have an image for this, but this is the same ideology that's happening with white supremacist groups,
Mm-hmm.
where people like Patriot Front are also wearing face masks and full on, like,
Sleeve cover.
sleeve covers so people won't identify them. And like how it's just so crazy how Mayor Adams was like talking about the tents at all the protests and how they all look the same. It's like, is this some kind of formulaic situation? And it just turned out that like these these tents were the number one tent on sale at Amazon.
Oh.
So the students were so broke that they were just buying the cheapest tent and they all just happened to have the same tent. Right? That was kind of the funny, haha, oh look how everybody, but it was spun to be more sinister by like, the media and politicians, right?
Right.
But the issue here is that like it is really weird on the other end, on the right, where Patriot Front and a white supremacist right-wing group and ICE agents are wearing the same facial and sleeve covering gear.
Right.
And that is what is really disturbing, because a lot of people have pointed out that a lot of these people in these groups are also police and are officials.
Right.
So, how many of these Patriot Front people are also people involved in law enforcement who don't want you to know either side that they're out there?
Right. Right. And that's the problem with concealing your identity.
Yeah.
Not only does it go against the law, but again, there's a lot of other domino issues that come up. So we have a sorry.
No, it's okay. You go ahead. Pull it up. She's Lacole is just pulling something up real quick.
So we have a CNN article about
Mhm.
this exact issue, right?
Mhm.
So just going up.
Yeah.
The article reads, as Trump's immigration crackdown continues, ethics questions are being raised over the use of masked federal agents. So this article is actually really helpful. It kind of goes through a lot of what we've already talked about.
Mhm.
But one of the points that I wanted to flag here, it said when CNN asked why officers have opted to use masks when detaining students, a DHS spokesman said, Quote, when our heroic law enforcement officers conduct operations, they clearly identify themselves as police while wearing masks to protect themselves from being targeted by known and suspected terrorist sympathizers. So that is coming from, again, a DHS spokesperson as the reason why they're covering their face. Um, so on that, I thought it'd be helpful to look at the counter side of that argument in the same article.
By the way, I really I love this part that you brought up. So please take us through this, because this is lovely how they're saying, oh well, we're afraid of being doxxed and being, but historically that hasn't been the case.
Right. So first we'll bring up the section here. So right. So first it says it is standard in the same article. It is standard procedure for ICE officers and other agents from the Department of Homeland Security to wear plain clothes, right, during field operations if they properly identify themselves as law enforcement officers. As we've seen time and time and again, not only do they, under the law that we just read, not only do they have to identify themselves, CNN, as officers, they also have to say who they're looking for, explain what the charges are, and I don't know, maybe not break people's car windows in because you ended up finding the wrong person. Maybe that's why he didn't want to open the door, because he maybe told you that, hey, that's not me, and you didn't listen. So now you busted open his car door, detained him for no reason, traumatized him probably for life and also his family. And then what? You get to wipe your hands clean in the situation, be like, oops, sorry.
That's the thing. They get to wipe their hands clean. They walk away from this while the person still has court, has to, show up and fight their case, have to pay extra for lawyers, all this stuff that this is also the damage. What all this, we may be saying, hey, ICE is doing this and ICE is, not following due process or whatever. Yes, that's all happening. But at the end of the day, these are real casualties to people. Even these small, like Jimena, who, was detained for allegedly making a turn that she didn't even make, and it was someone else and stuff like that. Jimena still had to spend 2 weeks in the ICE facility, over 2 weeks. She still had to, endure that trauma of seeing other people go through these abuses, just like she was going in. I mean, I'm not saying, like hearing people's stories of abuse. Right now, she had to get a lawyer. She had to come out. Now she has to fight this. And all of these things equate to a person's life being damaged. She's in college. She was in college.
Right. And again, for everyone that's being like, again, imagine if this was your kid. And before you're like, that wouldn't be my kid because I wouldn't put them through that. You don't know that because you haven't had those lived experiences. And this is what's called empathy, people. Just because you haven't lived a certain life doesn't mean that you're not able to understand someone else's life. It's called empathy. See outside of yourself.
These, unfortunately, and it's, I'm always like white people, but like white people, the majority, and then U.S. citizens just across the board think that they were born into this privilege that's going to last forever. No, it's not. If there's ever a point where this nation does, and who knows how quickly my words are going to come true, crumbles and people have to escape in fear, you're going to start seeing why so many people have done this around the world. And I'm just worried that they're still not going to have empathy, that they're going to be the same way as other immigrants who have come here, be like, well, close the door now, I'm safe. It's like, really? Really?
Yeah.
Sorry, Lacoste, what's next?
So the other flip side of the argument that DHS is proposing, right, comes again back in the CNN article that we're looking at. So ironically, quote, the optics are striking because historically in the US, agents have almost always gone without face coverings when arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, such as John Gotti, the head of the Gambino crime family, or the cartel boss, El Chapo, right? So I admittedly didn't know that, right? And again, I like to admit when I don't know things. And I was like, oh, look at that, because I'm like, well, I don't know the history of face coverings for arrests and all these things, right? So thanks, CNN, for flagging that. But I like to look things up myself in the way that I like to encourage everyone to look things up yourself, because that's the whole point of this. So I was like, hey, so when John Gotti was arrested, what was that like, right? Like, what did that look like? So just started playing the video, but
I'll bring you up right now. Let's go.
So this is John Gotti and Sammy the Bull arrested December 1990. Again, Fox archive. So even though we're not a fan of Fox News, but they
were the only ones that had the video readily available. So let's go. If you're watching at home, here's they're at a building, an office or something. John Gotti is coming out in cuffs.
In cuffs with
multiple police officers.
Multiple officers. Let me lower the volume. Multiple officers in suits,
Yeah.
no face coverings.
Police officers in their uniforms, no face coverings. Nobody face covering.
And again, this is a crime boss. We all know John Gotti, and
Yeah.
even I know John Gotti. So
Yeah.
like,
Growing Up Gotti.
you know, oh my God, I used to watch it.
I used to watch Growing Up Gotti. I'm not gonna lie.
All right, no,
it was one of the first A&E shows like that.
We'll move past it.
We'll move past that. We'll do not watch that show. But anyway, but you see,
well,
you
not only him, I have El Chapo too.
Okay.
So unfortunately, I wasn't able to find like footage of El Chapo when he was taken in. But let me see if I can fix this. Control V. No, it's not.
No. See, See, this is something that I do have to say while you bring this up real quick. We moved so quickly away from people not wearing face masks to wearing face masks that even in my brain, it got murky at how quickly this happened. Because now I'm so used to the face masks from police officers, ICE agents, FBI agents, everyone, Patriot Front, all these white supremacists, that it's just so weird to see a video where police officers just coming out not wearing anything.
Yeah, and we forget that that's actually the norm, and it was the norm for a reason, y'all. So here we have El Chapo, right? Because El Chapo was also mentioned in the article. So this is El Chapo just after, again, as you see from the Google search, after his extradition from Mexico. So from New York Times, CNN. So this New York Times image, let's just pull that up. Again, DEA, as we see DEA on
the screen.
On the screen, we have ICE even. No one's wearing masks.
No one wearing masks. This is El Chapo.
This is El Chapo.
Chapo.
This is one of the most dangerous people, as we know, right? So it's a little interesting that y'all don't wear masks for him, but for Rumesa, who by all intents and purposes, seemed pretty chill. She seems really nice. There haven't been reports of her being violent or anything.
She wrote an op-ed in a newspaper.
Yeah, like this is who we're talking about. So yeah, I just, I thought it was important to let's
go back to that real quick. Yeah, that picture. Sorry, I pulled it away. But like, look at this. Remember, there was a time that I remember.
Even military, right? We have military here.
Yeah,
grabbing El Chapo.
Yeah,
and military's face is still out.
This is where I remember, like, growing up, like police officers being proud,
correct,
of the job that they're doing, and showing like this is who we captured. This is what our work led to. And look at me, I'm right next to a Chapo, picking him up.
Yeah,
that's a United States norm. We were talking about how other countries don't have those norms,
right? And what's funny is that even in Mexico, right, Ejército de Mexicano, still showing
their face
with El Chapo, just chilling.
And like I said, these people are very much proud of the fact that they're like bringing these criminals in. So why?
Right.
Now, why, when you're going after college students, when you're going after, protesters, when you're going after moms and dads coming out of courtrooms, do you feel you need to hide your face? You know what I think? They know exactly what they're doing, and they don't want to go down in the history books. They don't want their face in the history books like, yo, that is fully me on page 14 of the social studies book in 7th grade.
Well, that's my thing. Like, if you are doing everything legally, and everyone has been saying that, right? You guys are trying to push this rhetoric of, well, migrants need to do everything legally. How about y'all start? With doing things legally? Because if you were, and again, we saw the law. That's the reason why I painstakingly, and again, sorry for it being boring in the first half of this, but went through that, because this is what they're supposed to be doing. Sure, there's exceptions. Sure, there's certain loopholes if you know how to play it right, unfortunately. But this is still technically the world that they're supposed to be functioning in. And if you were actually doing that, if you were able to pull up, hey, here's arrest record, here's where I gave them their rights, here's where I told blah, 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 and so confirmed it, blah, 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 examining officer here, cool. Sure, maybe people wouldn't be so upset. Did we ever stop and think, why are people so upset? For the people on the right, and again, I always try to hope that one day people on the right are hearing this. If it's mainstream media, if it's the public, if it's the majority of the population in the US, if it's everyone's believing something and everyone's telling you, hey, most of these people are not criminals. Hey, they actually aren't doing anything wrong. Hey, they have no due process, and this is going to domino and potentially affect all of us in the future if we don't stop it. Hey, this is what's happening. Why do you all of a sudden you believe everyone else is wrong? everyone else,
Of
all these
course.
other people.
That's what they do.
Because you want to be so contrarian, because you're too cool for school, because you don't want to whatever. Like, this is so much bigger than one person. This is so much bigger than just your individual beliefs. Now beliefs are being told as facts, and that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have a president who's just spewing out his own beliefs as if they're news and facts because he's in a position of power.
Right.
And because, again, I've talked to you about this, I don't understand why we don't have laws that restrict politicians from lying in public forums when they're giving, I don't know, the state of the country address and just literally lying.
Yeah.
How do we not hold the same caliber for officials in official settings, in official statements, in official speeches? How do we not hold a perjury caliber to that? Right? It's a danger to the public.
Yeah.
If you lie about the state of this
for our health. Yeah. It's
not only for everything.
No,
but like, think about it. For if they lie about diseases, if they lie, infectious diseases, if they lie about danger to the public, whether it's migrants, whether it's trans people, all the ridiculous things that they're saying,
lies.
Whatever it is, then that dominoes, as we've seen. That's why we're in this.
That's
because
fascism.
there's no regulations, there's no limitations on public officials in public settings in forums that are meant to be presented as this is the state of address of this country. This is facts. Why is there no legal repercussions for saying lies?
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
And I hope I'm not skipping to too much of what you did, like co-host, just because time limit here. But we do want to get into at least one last thing, that all this, them bypassing laws, not following norms, covering their faces, not identifying themselves, has led to impersonators, copycats, people abusing this ambiguity in this place that we're in to pass themselves as ICE agents and law enforcement when that is not what they are.
Right. So the first story we have of an impersonator, right? So this is from CBS 6 News in Albany. Dressed as ICE agent, Schenectady January 6th defendant attends CPAC.
I believe this is Brandon Fellows is his name, says on there, Fellows.
I believe so.
Brandon Fellows, yeah. Brandon Fellows is a January 6th insurrectionist who was pardoned by Trump. And now he's going around.
Yeah. He was going
dressed as an ICE agent. If you scroll down, you actually see like a small little clip of a video of him. There he is. So he bought this ICE gear online, which is pretty frustrating, and we might not be able to get into all the laws regarding, selling fake police, regalia. But this guy, he has been going around Home Depot scaring people with this jacket and having them run away, and he thinks this is hilarious.
Yeah, let's play this.
Do you actually work for ICE?
No, not at all. Nope.
Explain the outfit.
It's $29.99 on Amazon. I would recommend buying a small if you're my size. This one's a little too loose for my liking. But yeah, if you want some entertainment, wear this and go to a Home Depot in a sanctuary city like where I live right now, Washington, D.C., and you'll see all the illegals. Not all of them, but you can maybe see a lot of them start to run away, and you feel like a group fitness instructor. It's really good.
And you actually think that's funny?
I think it's hilarious. Absolutely. What's not funny is them illegally.
There you have it, everybody. One of the worst people I've seen here at CPAC, and that's saying something. Appreciate it.
Yeah. An insurrectionist.
Yeah.
An insurrection. I always thought maybe it would be funny if I walked around in a Capitol Police gear and went up to every single white person that I know, was like, "Hey, where were you on J6? I need to know we were on J6. Come with me. I need to know we were on." You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And if you feel uncomfortable at that idea and that suggestion, then you should be uncomfortable with all the other crap that's happening.
Oh my God,
because if you're not, then that's kind of
yeah. I would love to wear a Capitol Police jacket and walk into a douchebag gym just to see how many white rap bros just start running.
And that's
it's hilarious because then they'll take their protein and they'll run with their protein, and I feel like a fitness instructor.
Right, and exactly. Obviously, we're saying all this in satire and joke because
hashtag joke, because
it's ridiculous. In the same way, it's ridiculous that you take joy out of people running for their lives, and recognize that if you are that demonic and you're actually doing that, recognize that a good amount of those people are probably not here without status. They probably do have status, but the way our system is and the current administration, everyone is just so scared, understandably so, because clearly they're not following the law. So yeah, while you're there laughing, this person has been probably fighting for their lives for a while.
Yeah. And I always want to remind people, you need to read more about enslavement and exactly the laws that created enslavement and freedom and semi-free people and enslaved people and people who went to other states and got more rights than people. Do you know what I'm saying? These different levels of freedom and what your rights are every step of the way comes from enslavement, people.
Right.
These different statuses and laws and how much rights you get in one place versus another, and you know, in states that are more friendly to undocumented people than not, this is all from enslavement. Please read a book. Y estoy hablando contigo, latinos. Okay.
You said that too fast for them.
I'm sorry. Y estoy hablando con ustedes, latinos. I'm talking to you, latinos.
So we also have other evidence of it, right? So we have a situation where in South Carolina, Sean Michael Johnson, and I'll put the audio on soon, was charged with kidnapping and impersonating a police officer after detaining a group of Latino men in Charleston County. He pulled the group over to conduct, quote, a traffic stop, detained them in their car and harassed them and took their keys so they couldn't drive home.
Yeah.
So let me put...
Can we take it back?
Yeah, let me like refresh this.
Hot, Mo. Where you from? Mexico? You from Mexico? You're going back.
A South Carolina man has been charged with kidnapping and impersonating a police officer after officials say he detained a group of Latino men in Charleston County, South Carolina. 33-year-old Sean Michael Johnson is accused of willfully and unlawfully presenting himself as an ICE agent and detaining a vehicle of individuals from moving, according to court records.
Okay. No, you cannot drive, bro. You have not a license. You have no license. We're going back.
In addition to taking their keys, Johnson also blocked the men's car with his white van so they couldn't drive away, according to court documents.
You know, if you don't have a license, you cannot drive a car in the United States. No.
Whoa.
No.
All right, let's stop it there because it's just.
Well, I mean, yeah, normally I wouldn't play a video that long, but I think it's very telling. And in case people hadn't seen that video,
Yeah,
I think it's very important. Because again, this is just an example. It's not just an exception to what's happening. This is what's happening.
Yeah. He was detained and charged.
He was detained and charged. Yeah.
With impersonating an officer.
And it's going around in a lot of different places, right? Like this isn't a one-time thing as we are seeing, right? There are different articles about this as well. I'm trying to pull up a CNN article. But...
Yeah. No, sorry, we're having a little bit difficult pulling stuff up. Yeah, but God, just the way that guy was just like, no, you can. It just God, their privilege and their arrogance in it all. It's fucking horrible.
Yeah, and again, this is a CNN article titled "Multiple ICE Impersonations Arrests Made During Nationwide Immigration Crackdown." Right. So it's just, again, more examples of what's happening.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot. So as a woman, another reason why I brought this up is because, you know, of course, obviously we're all scared of being kidnapped.
Yeah.
And even bare minimum harassed in the way that we saw, which was disgusting. As a woman, and again, it's not only women that are victims of sexual assault, but it is a good number of women. I do want to acknowledge that, of course. But it's, as a woman, there's a different kind of fear, right? Because if people can just abduct people, right, that causes a potential danger.
Right.
Sorry, just bringing this up.
Yeah.
Of potential rape and sexual assault. And this CBS News article, apparent immigration agent impersonation in Brooklyn leads to attempted rape. So I just want to make it clear that the danger has so many different levels, right? Just whether you think about our legal system, the dismantling of it, whether you think about the pillars of our government, right? Whether it's checks and balances, whether it's, due process, whether it's whatever general legal concept that this is hitting, on a personal level, whether you're afraid of just going outside and literally being kidnapped. This is what everyone's afraid of. Without proper identification, without due process, without warrants, without paperwork showing that you're legitimate, without identification that's real, that's not bought on Amazon. This is how we safeguard ourselves.
Yeah.
Without this, our government is setting us up to potentially being kidnapped left and right.
Yeah.
That's what's happening
Yeah.
here.
By
That's
both
why
our own government
and
and impossible impersonators.
exactly, and that's already happening, and that's the scary part. So that's
Yeah.
really that's the
That's
point of all
that's
this.
the episode.
That's why we wanted to go through painstaking detail of one, in case you were curious of what they're supposed to be doing. This is an example of it, and two, this is the danger of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. This is the domino where it's already happening, and admittedly, it's probably just going to get worse if this continues. Where I think we reported, what was it, yesterday from on Chrissy Nome and Stephen Miller wanting to up the quota of detainments
To 3,000.
from 1,800 a day to 3,000 a day. And again, everyone, if this is what we're already seeing from the current numbers, imagine what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And please don't think you're necessarily safe just because you're a citizen. I'm not going around being like, oh, I'm good because I was born here. Cool. But like, that doesn't safeguard things. Citizens are being wrapped up in this.
And as we're seeing, people are impersonating agents. So if you're like, oh, I did nothing wrong, you can get hurt by somebody impersonating.
Right.
So don't think that you're safe from this.
Right.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy that they're even doing these masks. And then let's just leave it.
Yeah.
Anything else before we go? Let's leave it there.
That was it.
Thank you as always. I wish we had applause for the co-host for breaking down the parameters of why this all matters and how they're breaking these rules and creating not just danger for us.
Yeah, for everybody.
For everybody. And listen, I'll say this, and this is, you need to differentiate between these two things I'm saying. One, what ICE and federal agents are doing is terrible to people. But ICE and federal agents doing it this way is also dangerous for them. People are afraid. They don't know who's approaching them. They hear more stories about impersonation. Actually, the guy who shattered the window, people were alleging that he was a white supremacist person, and it turned out it was fake, that was not him.
That he was an actual agent and all that. Yeah.
But people are so afraid, and ICE agents and DHS and Christy Nome keep lying to us, and people keep impersonating that we don't know who's who. And if an actual ICE agent is trying to do their job, and people are scared, who knows what threat that could be for them. I'm not
advocating for that. Of course not. No.
But I'm saying on both sides, I want the people to be safe. I want people to get due process. I want people to be, safe if they're not committing any crimes.
Right.
And at the same time, yeah, I do want law enforcement to go after in the right way, in the proper way. Yes.
In the way that's laid out in the law.
Right. But you're also putting yourself in danger by doing all these things and scaring the community and, creating this atmosphere where people are just afraid.
Yeah.
It's for your own safety.
Yeah. This is a message for also law enforcement, right? Like, think about it for yourselves. Like, be careful. Like, hopefully the government isn't setting you up. I really hope so.
And also, again, saying following orders is not always the best defense later on when these cases start to come up.
Maybe get a different job.
Get a different job.
You don't got there's other jobs. I don't know.
But yeah, man, let's this craziness out there. Hey, I don't know. Do you want to do?
Yeah, to clarify, because to clarify for everyone who was very upset that I didn't have a happy thing last week. I'm allowed to have an off day.
Hey, that's fine.
Embrace your feelings, everyone.
That's good.
You know what's making me happy?
Tell me what's making you happy this week.
Being able to embrace my feelings.
That's great.
Being able to process my feelings, how I'm feeling now.
Yeah.
Being able to do this episode that I did last week, even though I was kind of down or whatever, but I still did it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
There you go.
Beautifully done. I'll keep it simple. For me, something that's making me happy this week is really cheesy as it is, it's family.
Yeah.
It really has been family. It has been people that I love. I've created a circle around me of people who are kind and loving and honest. And I've just had every moment that I get to spend with somebody that means a lot to me. I really have been cherishing it. And just, this is going to sound terrible, but, you're hearing all these stories of people who are just, in these terrible situations, and this is what we do. And it really it's such a weird way, like, almost like survivor's guilt, where like, I am just so happy right now of the things that are happening in my life and the family that I have. And I just cherish them for as long, as they're here, because you never know what this crazy world that we live in. So yes, I'm really taking in family.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, that's a message for everybody. Everybody should be appreciative of, if you're able to be walking free in this world right now, and the administration that we're in the country that we're in right now, and you're able to go about your day in a regular way, consider yourself lucky.
Yeah.
We are all very fortunate.
Keep fighting, but
yes,
remember,
please.
there are moments of happiness and joy and love in your life that you should take into
and appreciate the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, that was beautiful. Once again, thank you, like co-host, for breaking it down. Thank you to the people for watching it.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. We will see you again next week with a new topic. Say goodbye, like co-host.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.